throughout the years, but it has been going on for years. I would say that the concept of ISTAR, or intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, and reconnaissance, is something that has been implemented since at least the Cold War era up until today. And that's something that has evolved through time with technology, with development, with even military strategies, and also how the audience, by audience I mean the public international community, the civilians, actually accept digitalized and AI warfare. And ISTAR has been very present, especially with US and British military, with NATO forces back at that time. However, the difference between then and today is that now we see that using AI in warfare has become so much more explicit, and in its use and its deployment and its legitimization, of course. And it doesn't mean that it hasn't been explicit in the past. There have been lots of use of killer drones with the US war of terror on Pakistan after 9/11, and that has caused a lot of civilian casualties, but now we see it more explicitly as a way of justifying this for security purposes, and it's going on everywhere. And the problem is that once it's justified by powerful governments, other entities follow. So there have been cases of, so this was the case with the US especially, but I would highlight the example of Project Maven with the DoD. This has started since 2017, an approach that the US has started for data integration and using AI weapon systems, or even just autonomous targeting systems for their defense mechanisms. So when the US government does this, a lot of other entities would follow. So we're talking whether national or regional, we're talking law enforcement or marine security forces as well. And this, in my opinion, is one of the most dangerous proliferations in history of AI. And yeah, and of course, another example that I need to highlight is the excessive over-reliance on AI in the genocide that's happening in Gaza. We have the IDF using the Lavender model, and it's actually, it's used for classification models, so classifying which targets are affiliated to terrorists or terrorist affiliated. However, the most dangerous part of the IDF's AI militarization to me is not just the model itself, it's the whole process. So you see the outputs of the Lavender model are then used as an input for other models, such as Where's Daddy for target engagement and acquisition, and with human subjects, and the Gospel with targeting infrastructures and buildings. So you see the danger in here is how it's a loop, an iterative process of how one AI output can become another AI input, and that makes it very, very hard to keep up, honestly, with AI justice and accountability, which is exactly where we come in. Am I right? So, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, I have a sort of tee-up question for each of you, both to give you some space to describe the work that you do and how it connects to this topic, but also maybe answer a question that feels kind of impossible. And I want to start with you, Tawana. I mean, I know that you do a tremendous amount of community organizing around resisting carceral technologies, and also just trying to help reframe our entire social view of what the role of technology should be. So do you want to describe a little bit of your work with the audience and try and answer the question, when we think about community resistance to surveillance, is there a way that that can be a part of building digital self-determination? I know.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tawana. I'm also known as Honeycomb. I'm from Detroit, Michigan in the United States. And in Detroit, we say, "What up, doe?" Don't ask me why. We've been saying it my whole life. So if you see me, you can say, "What up, doe?" So my work, I've served in a lot of capacities. I'm an alumni of the Just Tech Fellowship. I've served as a data justice director at Detroit Community Technology Project. I've served as at the Algorithmic Justice League. I've served at Data for Black Lives, and I convened the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition for about 9 years. So I have a lot of work in that field, but I've also been a lifelong Detroiter community organizer, someone who pushes for consentful practice and data and digital justice. That question, so the community members have always figured out ways to flip these systems on their heads when they've been violent and infringed upon our dignity and human rights. I think about some of the work of the Equitable Internet Initiative where, these tech companies decided that there were certain neighborhoods that were not communities they wanted to invest infrastructure in so that children could have access to broadband internet access. That is an arm of Detroit Community Technology Project. And so they decided to build out their own wireless mesh networks and start their own ISPs so that they could provide internet technologies for community. And at the start of COVID, when a lot of young people were relegated to the homes in the inside of their homes, and they were just told you're going to learn online with no recourse as to whether or not you had internet infrastructure or not, or whether or not your neighborhood had that type of infrastructure, they took it upon themselves. And so those are just some examples of how community organizations and community organizers have created alternative visions to what tech companies have decided whether or not we deserve or not. And then there are ways that they flip surveillance on its head by their organizations who have created infrastructure. I think about Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and how they would monitor law enforcement activity using like surveillance technology. And so there are ways that we take the systems that are weaponized against us and then create community alternatives that I think are feasible examples of how you do it equitable and how you put a mirror up to the violence that we see algorithmic harms create.
I feel like also taking a step back. No, you did. I wanted to, for some people that don't know how technology is deployed against communities in Detroit by law enforcement, because they might not see the parallels between Detroit and Palestine.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like to live in Detroit and participate in a system, or not participate, be sort of constantly surveilled by these systems, and how you connect that struggle to other places around the world?
Yeah, I can say about 10 years ago, I traveled to Palestine by invitation, Palestinian organizers on the ground. At that time, it was around water rights advocacy. And there were the same exact corporations like Veolia and other corporations that were weaponizing their technologies to surveil and prohibit community members from having access to life-saving resources that were doing it in Detroit and doing it in Palestine. And so a corporation that's violent and doesn't care about your dignity and humanity, they have global tentacles, and they make connections on how to marginalize people. A lot of times we don't make the connections about how we become a resistance to that. And so I've been thinking about the Palestinian and Detroit and U.S. struggle for about 20 years, but more specifically 10 years ago, when I was on the ground in Palestine and I asked, because sometimes when you're from the U.S., no matter what marginalization you're experiencing, you have this exceptionalism that happens in your head when you go somewhere and you think you're there to help people, right? When you got your own stuff that you need to be putting a mirror on. And I remember asking organizers on the ground, what can we do? What can we do to support the Palestinian struggle? And they said, liberate Black people in America, and that would help all of us. And so that was like a rude awakening, because it was like these same systems are marginalizing us, and we could put our heads together to push back on those technologies and corporations that don't see us as full human beings. And then I'll finally put a pin in that by saying that we're probably in the top 5 most surveilled cities in the United States. We lead the nation in misidentification cases with police use of facial recognition technology. And there's surveillance tracking, there's drones. So it's like, it's not always the military, it's local law enforcement that gets these tools that are gifted to them by the military. Our law enforcement officers get trained by Israeli military, like they travel to Israel and get training. And millions of dollars right now is being invested into what do you call it? Cybersecurity defense contractor headquarters that's coming to Detroit. $60 million they're going to invest, and they're going to put it on the waterfront because they want access to that water. And so the data centers are coming for Detroit. The military headquarters is coming to Detroit, and they're using the same companies and the same training that they use in Palestine to train Israeli military. So the connections are very stark. And so we just have to keep having conversations like this so that we see those connections and we can organize against them.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump to you, Paul. I feel like we've gone from wondering, are companies complicit in genocide? Are companies actually integrating knowingly faulty technologies into weapons of war very shamelessly, to now knowing that fact and that being known isn't necessarily resulting in any meaningful action as far as I can see. And I wonder, as someone who's worked on this issue of corporate accountability among other things, like how do you, what might it look like for there to be accountability for the technology companies that are participating in these systems?
Cool. So I'll quickly say who I am before I get into the question. So I run Tech for Palestine. We are an advocacy group for Palestinian liberation, and the main way that we work, apart from working to hold tech companies and the tech industry accountable, is that we create an incubator for tech advocacy, for Palestine advocacy. So what that means is we're supporting 73 organizations that are working to help scale up boycotts, to look into media bias, into AI bias, creating alternate tech tools that are built by people who are not within the sort of right-wing tech ecosystem, and mostly we are looking at ways with the goal of liberating Palestine. How can we change how the tech industry works and how the tech industry has supported the genocide, the occupation, the apartheid in Palestine? So to the question of accountability, I think the first reason that we haven't seen accountability arrive is that only recently has the dam broken about speaking up about Palestine. The genocide started over 2 years ago, and it was about May this year that we saw a real sea change. And a lot of people have pinpointed a particular Guardian article that got published as the thing that sort of opened the floodgates of people speaking about Palestine. So we're not really 2 years into the movement for accountability. We're 6 months into the movement for accountability. And you can see that now people are able to speak up about Palestine in a much more meaningful way than they were. And that is turning, in some meaningful ways, into accountability. I'll give you one little example that is happening right now. For about 2 years, a company called Sequoia. This is the biggest VC firm in the world. This is the most important VC firm. They invested in Google and Apple and they are the number one. And they have had this racist, far-right extremist named Sean McGuire as a partner in their firm. And people have been speaking up about it, and people have been calling them out, and there has been pretty much no accountability. A couple months ago, the New York Times had an article about it, Business Insider. People started writing about petitions that have been put together by founders, and no change. Their COO quit, no change. Yesterday, or Wednesday, the head of the firm stepped down. And Thursday it came out that he was pushed out because of all the pushback that is happening against the firm. This is the number one firm in tech. This is the most important VC firm in terms of deciding what companies get created. And their institutional investors, the employees at companies, the founders who wanted to raise money from them, all pushed back, and that led to the head of the firm actually being pushed out, which is absurd, unheard of. And I think that those of us who have looked at the sort of oligarchification of tech, of the unaccountability at big tech, the idea that the head of the number one VC firm in Silicon Valley would get pushed out for essentially for Palestine, right? For allowing this sort of like hard right pro-Israel stuff to happen within his firm. I think that's unheard of. We had a similar thing with Microsoft. Microsoft actually had accountability happen. First time a tech company applied some sort of internal sanctions on Israel. Microsoft cut access to Unit 8200s, who were using Azure to survey millions of Palestinian phone calls. I think millions of Palestinian phone calls per day. And Microsoft cut them off because of continued pressure, because of investor pressure, and because it violated the basic rules of business that companies pretty much have to do in order to get money from institutional investors, which is have codes of ethics, basic human rights principles that are sort of used across the board. So we've seen that was the first time that happened in a big tech company. That's the first time that it certainly happened in a VC or anyone really that powerful in Silicon Valley. So I think it is not that accountability has not come. It is that accountability has only just started coming. And really, we are at the start of a long road where a lot of these companies are going to see their complicity, which has already been highlighted, start to affect their users, start to affect their partners, start to affect the people that really enable their business to happen, workers, partners, users, investors, et cetera.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. You've been doing a lot of both research in how these technologies are being used, but also organizing to better connect the people that are uncovering what's happening and trying to turn that knowledge into some type of accountability pathway. Do you want to reflect a little bit on the kinds of work that you're doing to sort of hopefully take advantage of some of this newfound space for finding accountability and tactically how you're working?
Hello, everyone. My name is Nada Musa. I am a tech justice activist, researcher, and organizer. I'm also a Mozilla fellow. Okay, so let's start first by saying that it's been quite clear for all of us that we are not talking about a mere technological advancement in warfare. We are talking about infrastructural violence that decide who get to leave, who should be controlled, and whom narratives should be erased. And from my opinion, I see that this technologies have become a terrains for power and economy, and a new form of geopolitical domination. And unfortunately, we are facing a huge issue or huge accountability crisis, failure of human rights mechanisms, and a deep regulatory vacuum that helps intensifying these violent technological practices. So, yet, I still bet on the human agency as a main actor inside this global disorder. And also I'm betting on the shared awareness that we have all reached after October 7. And I do believe that we have to acknowledge now that we have done a lot of great efforts over the past few years as resistance acts. But also it's very important, in my opinion now, and urgent, to start transform this fragmented or let's say personal and collective initiatives into a more systemic, radical, cross-border, cross-discipline, cross-pollinated movement. And the most important thing is to build this movement from the bottom up. So, I am from the MENA region. I'm Egyptian, I'm not Palestinian, but also even in Egypt and Jordan and other MENA countries, we are testing grounds for this surveillance and AI systems. So I just want to give like a gentle reminder for myself and for all the frontliners here in the room that if we are advocating for those communities, those affected communities, it's very important when we design our interventions and our tactics, we have to work closely with these communities because we are the testing grounds, we are the human trials. So we have to ensure that our interventions and our tactics are not isolated from the realities, and it should be also reflect on the needs and also not only the needs but also the imagination of justice for these communities. So in my opinion, what we need now is to work all together because this is a long fight. So it's time now to think about having a collective action that can stand against this killing machine.
Yeah, as part of that killing machine, I think there's it can sometimes be difficult to talk about because it seems digital. It's hard to get our hands around it. And I wonder, Sada, if you can talk a little bit about in your work, how do we make the violence more, not visible literally, but something that we can understand and act on when it feels like basically all of the incentives for deploying these technology is usually to try and hide what's happening or make it harder to have a terrain of accountability and sort of political discourse about what's going on.
Okay. Sorry, my immune system today is running out of cloud storage.
You need water. We have some down here.
Yeah.
You're doing great.
As a researcher myself, I think there's a lot of efforts that we can take collectively, also to build on Nada's approach with multidisciplinary efforts. I think it's very important. And I just want to back up one step before the actual research, because I know that in research, it helps a lot with litigation, with accountability, because there's like rigorous in-depth analysis of like the technology, the gaps in it, the limitations, the bias. But if we go one step back before the research, we need data. And that requires transparency from the entities that are using AI in military. And unfortunately, that has been a problem. And I know that research is something that we rely on in order to address this violent approach with whether surveillance or targeting or engagement. But one effort that I really want to highlight, and maybe people in the room would exit after the session and consider, is collectively co-creating databases on AI and tech applications in military. I'm not talking just instances of this has been applied in location X in time Z. No, I'm talking in-depth data about the tech, the precision, the validation metrics of AI models that are used, etc. And the reason I said it's a collective and multidisciplinary effort is because we need journalists, we need tech people, we need researchers, we need activists to co-create these databases in order for the research community to leverage it for actual research that will be useful for AI governance frameworks, for accountability at the International Court of Justice. So we need to start one step ahead first. And just a quick question, because I know, is there anyone here from tactical tech by chance? Maybe you raise your hand? No, but I think I'm pretty sure tactical tech are starting to do something similar, a database related to AI and military. It's one step, but I would love to see more people and more organizations address database creation as as seriously as the actual research output, because we can't do one without the other. And yeah, of course, transparency is an issue, but we have to work with what we have. Sometimes, like I said, the reason I mentioned journalists is because journalists on the field, sometimes they have more access to information, in my experience at least. So we need each other, basically, in order to address this.
I feel like, Paul, you saying that this is the beginning of accountability already made me feel slightly better. Maybe I'm being premature, but I also think that Nada, your point about this moment of global disorder also feels really apt, and that tactics and strategies of transparency or visibility that may have led more organically towards pressure and change don't feel like the sort of physics of our accountability systems feel like they're not working. And so I wonder a little bit if we seize this moment where there's a change in opportunity for accountability, maybe where there's more public consciousness about these issues, maybe where there's these moments where pressure is building. Does anybody, what are you all thinking about what might result in translating that into actual change and accountability? Like, are you seeing things working that you're surprised by? Are you excited about particular opportunities in these moments, whether that's in courts, whether that's in public opinion, whether that's with particular policymakers or nation states or companies? Is there anything that you're seeing that you're feeling motivated by? It's okay to say no. I just wanted to name that actual optimism that I just got from that. Yeah, Nada, go ahead.
Okay, I guess that we have a lot of opportunities and also we have a lot of challenges, but it's fine. We have to keep fighting. We have some tactics that are, I'm actually cautiously optimistic about strategic litigation, but I still see it must be one of the tactics that we use in this movement. Because we have a lot of differences in the jurisdiction systems from the US to the EU to the UK, so it's very important to be very tactical in choosing this which jurisdiction systems that we can rely on. And also we have to do a lot of pre-litigation work, collecting evidence, rigorous evidence. We have to pay attention to the protection of all those involved in this litigation efforts. Perhaps I see that it might be good to start first with targeting small complicit actors like small and medium enterprises, tech enterprises, investors, universities, and then start think bigger to target big tech companies and governments. Also, another tactic that is been discussed a lot over the past 2 weeks with my colleagues is building alternative digital infrastructures. This is also very important, and in my point of view, I still see that this is the ultimate way to be freed from the capitalistic system or techno-capitalism. But also we have to be realistic and see this as a more of not a short-term goal, but a long-term goal or a vision. Because I don't think that we have the technical capacities now to offer alternatives for these tech products. For instance, I have been using Nextcloud, for example, for 2 or 3 years as an alternative for the Google suite. And it always crashed, so I get back again to Google. Also, after the collapse, the Twitter collapse, I tried to migrate to Blue Sky and Mastodon, and then I found myself talking to my friends. So I think that we have to be very realistic on what kind of digital infrastructures that we need now. The most urgent thing is to build infrastructures that can help the movement be organized, We need to build digital infrastructures that are safe. For example, we need a documentation tool, a safe and secure documentation tool that can be used by those on the front lines in Gaza and in southern Lebanon. And then we can use this documentation tool to have more evidence that can feed into campaigns and strategic litigation. So this kind of digital infrastructure that we can start working on now, but those big alternatives, I don't think that we are ready to do it. But that doesn't mean that we should start working on this to be ready for the change moment. But at the same time, we have to be very realistic about alternative digital infrastructures. This is mainly the main two tactics that I think that most of those who are on the front lines, because we have been in Beirut last week and we met a lot of frontliners, technologists, litigators, whistleblowers, human rights defenders, and they are all agreed on the same things, that we have to start strategically use litigation and to start think about how we can build the movement digital infrastructures.
That's great, thank you. Paul, did you have ideas?
Yes, so I think you're totally right about the ethical alternatives and moving the power out of big tech. One of the pillars of Tech for Palestine is starting some of these initiatives, and we have a couple of them actually. So like if you want to move off Meta, we have a new Instagram alternative called Upscrolled. If you don't like ChatGPT, which you shouldn't, we have an ethical alternative called Thora.ai. And building these alternatives are inherently going to be something that are in the very early stages, right? If you're on Instagram, you're going to have 1 billion people to be able to choose from. If you're on Upscrolled, I think there's about 75,000, which is a start. But it will take time for these things to come along. And the point that you were making earlier, Alex, about we are seeing all of this like suppression, all this like right-wing stuff, all this like awful stuff going on at the same time that we have a little bit of hope. And the fundamentals of the movement is that the extremism is the thing that has given people the ability to be so pronounced in their activism. Mamdani's win, for example, this week is something that happened. Yeah, absolutely. Ooh. Mamdani's win is something that could not have happened if the people in power had not overplayed their hand. Right? The attacks in the various different, Trump sending in the National Guard into all these various cities, right? That's something that obviously we're very depressed and shocked and that sort of thing about. But there will be blowback for that, and the blowback tends to come in the form of our movement taking a lot more wins, and it's like the accountability that I was saying earlier. We're only just starting to see some of those now. Mamdani's win, for example, but that must by necessity be happening at the same time as the extremists are still doing the extremist things.
I feel like, so Tawana, something I hear you say a lot is that surveillance ain't safety, which I love as a way of reframing narratives of how dominant culture sort of thinks about technology and surveillance and these kind of systems of control. And I think narrative is a really important part of the challenge here. And one thing I wanted to get your take on, not just you, Tawana, but all of you, is that AI in the context of war or in the context of surveillance or carceral systems is oftentimes pitched to people who think they're not subject to it as a way to make society safe or do these other sort of neutral things. We're just trying to make it more efficient for us to do this thing that of course you support because it assists you in your everyday life, when obviously that's not true. People are in relation with others and no one's safe. if there are people who aren't safe. And I wonder if you all have reflections on how narrative around these topics is changing, and if there are things that you're seeing that help people reframe their understanding of how these systems should be deployed in the world, if at all. Like, do you have another quippy thing like that I can use? Is my main question.
You know, it's so funny because I remember when it felt like, you know, when I'm cautious to say I coined the term, but like I'll say I was very early in saying that phrase.
I give you credit. It's fine.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
But I felt like there was so much momentum around that at that time. It was like everybody's like, surveillance ain't safety, or surveillance isn't safety, et cetera, et cetera. And then surveillance got, and I can give this credit to, I think, Foucault and Jennifer, I forget her last name, and I've heard Safia Noble talk about, and also Simone Brown talking about the gamification of the surveillance state. And I feel like it's become so gamified now that I'm not hearing as much surveillance ain't safety, and I'm seeing all these other ways that folks are voluntarily participating in the carceral practice, right? Whether it's joining an app where you're digitally sending videos of people in the neighborhood that are doing things that you don't like, or, you know, everyone has a Ring or some sort of alternative version of a video camera doorbell where, you know.
Pause just a second. How many in this room have a video camera doorbell? I'm not raising my hand, but I just want to show you what I want you to do if you do. Okay. Just curious.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious to see if there was going to be this wave of people saying, I do that, but I'm here in this session because I'm interested. But that's, all right.
I mean, this is the first room I've seen where a lot of people didn't raise their hands, so that gives me hope. You were asking about hope. That gives me hope. But, you know, and it's sometimes we think externally often about, like, you know, the ways that surveillance shows up. But, like, carcerality is so internalized now that we found ways to surveil our communities. And I'm using that loosely because apparently none of you all, but there are a lot of ways that surveillance has creeped into our lives in interesting, dynamic ways, and in ways that we consent to, and I use that in a coercive way. But, right, if you start pushing back, like how surveillance ain't safety was just such on a mass scale at one point, they give you a way to scan your face so that you can have an emoji that looks just like you, or, you know, like there are all these ways that it becomes fun to participate in surveillance. But we don't see it as surveillance, right? I want to give a shout out to the Algorithmic Justice League and fly.ajl.org, which you can still visit that site. Like the report that was just recently released, I'm happy to have participated in that. But the reason why you see signs in airports that say you can opt out of facial recognition is because we fought for that. Right? But I remember when we were fighting for that and the inconvenience that people felt, you know, in the line behind us, like, just scan your face and come on, like you're holding up the line. Like, there's so much pressure to just go along with the systems as is, or you feel so coerced into participating in the system that you feel like, well, it's that way and they already have my data, so I'm just going to go ahead with it as it is. And so I don't have a new quip that can be like an alternative to that, but I'd like to revive surveillance ain't safety and really get us to thinking about also the ways that it's been gamified and made fun for us, and the ways that we might participate in it that we don't intentionally want to participate in it. And so we have to, like, decarceralize our minds and not be thinking about targeting and tracking people, and stop othering each other. Like, there's still a lot of othering that goes on that leads us to behave in that way. And so, you know, we have some humanity work to do.
Yeah, jump in. I was going to say, actually, the invisibilized systems, like the fact that it looks like an emoji game, but it's actually the infrastructure of the surveillance state is a bit sometimes hard to process. But Sada, thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you so much for the intervention. And to add on the fun aspect, I'm going to shift to the fear aspect, if I may. I've recently done research on tech use, not necessarily AI, but any technologies, emerging technologies used in border control in the Mediterranean Sea. And in this research, the one thing that I concluded is that surveillance in border control is feeding off of the fear of people that believe there's something to be afraid of, you know? And this is the problem, is that we justify using these technologies in not only in border control, in multiple other contexts as well, but we justify it for the safety of, you know, national security, safety of the people, but I think it's just an excuse, and we never really see concrete proof, you know, like in my research at least, and I never really see concrete outputs that say, oh, this surveillance act and this, you know, embedding AI, for example, in, I don't know, interviews with asylum seekers or anything has led to a specific concrete result of safety. How do you measure safety? You know, that's my question to whoever is using this surveillance tech very excessively. How do you measure it, and who defines it? And the spread of fear is a strategy as well that we need to be very wary of in our advocacy, in our research, even in how, when we interview people. Like when I, for example, interview migrants and refugees back home, I know I always try to show them the strategy of whoever's using surveillance on them, because sometimes they don't see it, they start to believe sometimes that they are a threat, although they're not. So it's an issue. It's even like manipulating psychologically the mindset of migrants and refugees and asylum seekers, and it really saddens me so much, yeah.
I feel like those words security and safety, they're so loaded, and they get weaponized in all kinds of ways. But Paul or Nada, any reflections on narrative frames that you feel like are helpful for imagining what these systems actually are or how we want them to be?
I mean, I think what was being said about fear there is, you know, a very important thing to look at, because we are seeing that they are weaponizing fear in order to achieve their political gains. You know, Trump in America, and I think this is true of fascism worldwide, uses, you know, fear of migrants in particular. Israel has a huge propaganda campaign at the moment trying to make us afraid of Muslims and Arabs, and just, you know, trying to spread Islamophobia because they've identified that it is helpful to their political goals. And so when we look at the systems in terms of the, you know, the cameras or the gunshot monitors or that sort of thing, people are installing those because they have been told, you know, by the apparatus, the politicians, the media, and so on, that they need these things to stay safe. And so the system sort of, you know, works together nicely to get the outcome that they want. And, you know, that has been, to my mind, behind the huge slide to the right that we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, I see the narratives working against us. I'm just hoping we can find ones that, like, because surveillance, it's just such a, it's such an effective reframe. But Nada, jump in, yeah.
I think that they actually make our life much more easier in changing narratives, because what I see after October 7, that not only the activists and the intellectuals know about this military-industrial complex and this supply chain, but also the public now knows that Meta is complicit, Google is complicit. So I believe that they make it very easy for us to change narratives. And now maybe we have done a lot in changing narratives over the past 2 years. We have now to move forward. We have to take those companies to the courts. We have to build a strong movement to use all the available tactics, the pragmatic ones, the radical ones. We have to keep knocking all the doors. And I believe that the idea of changing the narrative might need some work on specific things, not related to if they are complicit or not. It's done. But now we have to start thinking of how we can have more literature, have more evidences about the realities that's happening on the ground. We still have a gap in this. This is the narratives that we have to work on. We need more knowledge production from Palestine, from inside Palestine, from the MENA region, from all the affected communities all over the globe. Because I'm really concerned, because we have been used, this region have been used for over a decade now as a marketing for the human rights and the democracy, and how these platforms are helping us to mobilize in our countries. And then after October 7, we realized that it's all politics. There is no human rights, there is no democracy. So now we have to start thinking about how we can push our narratives into the academic debates, for example, into the media. We need more voices, we need more profiles, because sometimes it's unintentionally that we are marginalized, but most of the times we are intentionally marginalized. So I think that we have to conquer a lot of spaces in order to take back the narrative, not change the narrative.
Thank you. I'm going to steal a question that Justin Hendricks asked this morning to a group talking about data center expansion. And his question was, is it perceived as the imperial project that it is by people situated in different places? So when you talk to a fellow Egyptian about what's happening, or do people that aren't working directly on this topic, do they conceptualize it as an imperial project?
No, we just know that we have a data center that is funded by the Gulf countries somewhere in the administrative capital, and that's it. Yeah. And I don't think that we, even the activists and the digital rights organizations in Egypt, they don't have enough information in order to start doing any kind of litigation or research. It's totally vague. We don't know anything until this moment. So
yeah,
we are waiting to see.
Do you find that people are connecting the dots between Meta and what's happening in Gaza? Do you feel like people are like stopping using? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The public.
Yeah. The public.
Yeah, because we are. For instance, when I was working on my master's dissertation, it was a comparative research between the global activists and the MENA activists, and it was about documenting the digital resistance practices that have been used in order to bypass the censorship. So one of the interesting findings that the content removal and the suspending the accounts are the most used practices from Meta against the MENA activists. However, in the global north, they prefer to use the shadow banning. So they are more aggressive with us, and this is why it becomes very clear to everyone that they are complicit.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we have a few more minutes, and I feel like I could ask you guys questions from now until next year, but that feels unfair. So I want to turn over to the audience, because I feel like there are people in here that probably I can feel the question energy. So I see a hand up. I don't actually know. You're close enough. I can just hand you a microphone. Hang on. You got it.
First of all, thank you so much. This was such a brilliant panel. My question is, what's the line between documentation and surveillance? Right? And for context, I'm a content creator. I do social media strategy, and I've done some work for Palestine Advocacy Online, narrative shifting, which I think I want to acknowledge that, yes, the public did shift narrative, but it was active effort by many social media influencers, obviously first-hand accounts, Basan, Plestia, but also so many young people and social media strategists. It was an active effort online to shift the propaganda. Mamdani, right? Great. Which, by the way, I do have Mamdani flyers. I was a volunteer with this campaign. Happy to hand them out. Yeah, and because like I'm also currently strategizing on Sudan advocacy, and we struggle with like how much we have footage from journalists, but not first person as much. Obviously, it's things on the ground, and I struggle with we should obviously believe people, right? We shouldn't have to need evidence, but it seems like that kind of evidence does help shift minds and hearts. And I also struggle with surveillance culture, and I like don't know where to draw the line because I, as a young content creator, it's like very grown up on social media. I'm like used to like seeing myself in third person. Everything I do, I think of that camera lens. You know what I mean? So, yeah,
I really like this question of the difference between documentation and surveillance, especially when we're talking about visibility in conflict. Who wants to? Yeah, you want to go? Yeah.
That made me think about when the Flint water crisis happened in Flint, Michigan. Around the same time, there was 100,000 people in Detroit whose water was turned off, and about 100,000 people in Flint whose water was poisoned. And every journalist wanted a person who didn't have water. Like, we believe y'all, but we need to be able to have a person who
I need to see
we
a
can
thirsty
see
person.
struggling
Yeah.
and not have, you know. And I think yes, ultimately putting that, unfortunately, the culture we live in, putting that person's face or someone's child that hasn't bathed and help to catapult a campaign. But what you have to do is ensure that there's a mechanism created to protect that person when you sacrifice them in that way, right? Who's the village that's going to make sure that if something happens to them, that, you know, there's resources that are created? Like, how do they not just become something to be paraded around and then get left to their own devices as they become viral, right? And now they have to deal with the aftermath of that. And so we had to make sure that the people that we did center were politicized on what's the impact of having your name, your narrative, your story be globalized, and then how can we ensure that your needs are met? The whole reason why we came to you is because you didn't have water. How do we make sure you get water? How do we make sure you get resources and you come out of that condition? So it's not just a story, right? Those stories are going to matter, but we just have to protect them the best way that we know how. We have to create a village around them to ensure that they're not just being used for the story. And that's how we went about it. But
That's great. Anybody else that's in the first 3 rows? Come on. Okay, 5 back. That's fine. I think Callie's going to bring you this. Ooh. There we go. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for the panel. My name is Alia. I have a question around like kind of creative strategizing around these campaigns. I know there's been a lot of mentions of the Mamdani campaign today, and like social media and communication strategy around that. I live in New York too, and I really don't think, I think the role of social media and communications is like widely overstated when talking about the campaign. I think it was like clear messaging around affordability issues that the working class needed. And it was like thousands and thousands and thousands of people canvassing in the streets every single day. Like it started going viral on social media after the grassroots support was already built. And I think we saw like a different type of grassroots campaigning that was needed in the city. And I think when I think about Palestine organizing, which I'm also very actively a part of in New York City, I think there's been a sense of defeatism or kind of disenchantment with the tactics that we've tried over and over. So October 7 happened, we did the same stuff that we used to do in 2021, in 2018, in 2014, and so on. But as the genocide progressed, people saw that the protesting wasn't working anymore and the petitions weren't working anymore, and I think we've seen a sense of fatigue in the old strategies and the need to like take a step back and think more creatively. So I'm wondering, in your work respectively, and I know like creative strategic litigation was mentioned, for example, if there are things that you've thought about with your communities. I mean, the incubator is a great example maybe of that, where this like conversation was happening intentionally and in a proactive way rather than kind of a more reactive responding to this huge event way.
It's a great question. I think it's going to be our last one. Yeah, jump in, Paul.
Yes, so this is something that we've been thinking about for a long time. I think this might be controversial, but I agree with you. Protests are not working, especially in America. And you know, being in New York, I've seen the exact same thing. Right? we saw the protests get smaller. We saw them get kettled very easily. The police were extremely good at shutting them down because they've learned, right? The adversary learns. The challenge that we have is that the mechanisms that we have of raising our voices have been shut down on social media in protest. And so we need to find new ones. And I think exactly what you're saying about the Mamdani campaign, and they went door to door. The Palestine movement needs to shift to door to door. And we've been raising this with a couple of issues, and there was a particular moment for me that it really hit home. That I was at a Meta protest, and it was in front of Meta's offices in Manhattan, which was right next to a subway station. And I realized almost no one heard me speak. But in the 30 minutes before I spoke, when I was handing out flyers at the entrance to the subway, I probably reached about like 200 people with just simple flyers. And so I think that we need to take the things that we are doing online, where we have been shut down and suppressed, and start to do them offline. A protest of 5,000 people is very easy for police to shut down. 1,000 5-person protests are impossible to shut down. And we have in the Palestine movement a natural place to shift those protests, which is boycotting. There are so many companies, McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, these are Zara, these are all boycotted. And you have 5 people, and we're literally experimenting with this right now. You take a couple of people, you put them outside of McDonald's, and you say, please don't go in because of the boycott. That will work. That does work. We've tested it out. And so the idea that we can only keep going with these mass things, we've seen that they don't work. And it needs to shift to in-person, one-to-one, taking the conversation to individuals by the people within the movement.
Any others want to share thoughts on this one?
I just want to second you, Paul, in this. Perhaps we have to think about mobilization in a different way. Maybe the mass mobilization is not working in the US, but I think it's working in Europe. But perhaps having micro mobilizations, like the tech workers, for example, in Silicon Valley, mobilizing the student mobilizations, for example, the scholar activism movement inside the universities now that help us a lot to know about how these universities are complicit. So I think that, yes, I agree that we have to think differently on how to use, what's better. It's better to go for mass mobilization or not. And this is, because this is a global issue now. And for example, in the MENA region, we can't do street mobilizations. No way, even for Palestine. And in the US, for example, it's more restrict. In the European Union and the UK, it's more acceptable. So we have to do like a mapping for where is the opportunities. If there is an opportunity for mass mobilization in the UK and Europe, and it's safe for the activists, because this is very important, so then we can push into mass mobilization in this region. And we think differently in the US, how we can do micro mobilization, for example. So this is why I see that we have to be resilient, especially in dealing with this global issue. We have, as a movement, we have to be resilient, and we have to be abrupt, iterative, and consistent in our efforts.
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to jump in? Yeah.
I'm just going to say that I think we need all of them. We need the armchair activists, the keyboard activists, the on-the-ground activists, the researchers, the artists, the photographers. Like, we need every single skill and talent that people have to offer in our movements to shift narrative and create our own narratives. And I agree that the mass mobilizations are not the end-all, be-all, but I do think it's a good place to distribute zine. I'm a zine fan. Like, I love zines and toolkits and leaflets, and I would have been talking to you at the gate for like 20 minutes. But Yes, yes, and we got to get back to phone trees and like getting together and like calling each other on the phone and like, but there I'm gonna agree with. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Asked the first question, but I'm gonna
She's
say
passing out leaflets.
yeah,
so
the
you
leaflets, passing out leaflets, but also a social media organizer, right? So there are young people who have a whole lot of energy and are, grew up in the social media era. They didn't have the dial-around phone like I had, when I was coming up, but that's going to be important too. We need interventions in social media as well, and so I would just say it's also and also to both and all of it is how I would frame it.
Yeah, quick.
Just a very quick
Yeah.
addition to all of the actors that she mentioned. We do need everyone. I just want to emphasize particularly on the diaspora community who are originally from the MENA region, because I know for a fact that there are lots of Palestinians, Lebanese, and Sudanese out there in different countries around the globe that are doing amazing work in startups and tech ed and a lot of tech companies. And I think investing in that along with the boycotting and all the other efforts, I think is very helpful, because not only it gives an alternative to digital infrastructures like Nada said, but also helps with sort of imbalancing this power dynamics of tech companies.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, that's a good place to end. I think they probably would also be up for strategizing further for those of you that want to chat with them over the next few days, because they are amazing activists and working in so many different ways on this issue. And thank you so much for everything you've shared, and thank you all for coming. Do keep your sheet and go reflect on some of those questions, and we'll be around for the next few days for you to keep this conversation going.
We have a cool thing that you might want.
Yeah.